Let's go.
Today, I'm going to talk to you about advanced identity for product-led growth. First, I'll introduce myself. I'm Amy Hanlon. I'm a software engineer at WorkOS, and I have over a decade experience building both consumer and enterprise software at places like Quip, Venmo, and now WorkOS. And for the past year and a half, I've spent developing identity features for Auth-Kit, our user management platform and hosted login box. Now, whether we're talking about identity in Auth-Kit or in your own application, we all start with basically the same features. We add passwords, maybe magic links, we add social logins, Google OAuth, and then if we're a B2B app, we add SSO. And I'd love to tell you that the complexity as you add each of these features just gradually and predictably increases over time. But that's not the case. Instead, it feels more like this. Tag yourself. I'm in the top right, doll-up authentication. So today we're going to embrace this chaos and learn about why the identity space it feels so murky and confusing. So one of my favorite things to do while working on Auth-Kit is doing a bunch of product discovery, getting admin access at a bunch of different B2B SaaS apps, thank you, Michael, and trying to reverse engineer them. So try to figure out how do they do home realm discovery, how do they model users and orgs in their app, and try to understand why they made those particular decisions that they made. So today, I'm going to take you on that process with me, and we'll look at 3 apps, Slack, Notion, and GitHub. Let's start with Slack. OK, show of hands, how many of you use Slack? OK, everybody in the room. OK, how many of you are signed into more than one Slack workspace right now on your phone? Yeah, switch between them. Now, there's 2 main ways to model a B2B SaaS app, or orgs and users in an app. On the left here, we've got this multiple workspaces model. There's a centralized user object. They can be a member of more than one org, any number of orgs. Switch between them, but it's the same user ID. And then the other model is a single workspace model, where users are only ever a member of a single org. So if you switch to a different org, you're using a different user ID. So quick quiz, see if you're paying attention. Raise your hand if you think Slack uses the multiple workspaces model. Oh, OK, oh, don't be shy. Stand on business. OK, raise your hand if you think they use a single workspaces model. OK, yeah, single workspace. I won't do that to you too many times, don't worry. So when you're switching workspaces in your Slack app, you're switching between different user accounts, different user IDs. You can get a clue about how this is working if you change your name or like your username or profile photo in one workspace. It's not propagated against all of them. And maybe this is what you want. If you're a nerd like me, I've got basically a group text that's a Slack workspace with my friends, and you could do whatever like weirdo memes you want in your profile photo, and it won't leak into your professional workspace. But there's downsides to this approach too. Like anytime Slack introduces a new feature, you get the new user experience flow across all 14 of your workspaces. You like kind of click through to X out of it each time. And that said, though, this is a pretty common model for users and orgs in an app that's focused on enterprise right out the gate. And one of the reasons is it keeps the model for SSO relatively simple. So to explain what I mean by that, let's take a brief detour. Now, raise your hand if you think identity providers verify emails. So if a user signs into your app, like hands down. OK, raise your hand if you think they do not verify emails. You get user signed in via SSO. OK. Yeah, they don't. Preaching to the choir here. In fact, I could add your boss's email to my IDP. I could pop open Okta, add your boss's email, set a password, and set up SSO on a bunch of different SaaS apps and try to sign in as your boss. Now, for identity providers, this is actually the expected way to use an IDP. It's like a feature, not a bug. This might be pretty surprising to those of you if you haven't used an IDP at work, but you actually get access to your email inbox most often by signing in to your IDP. So there'd be this chicken or the egg problem if you had to verify your email first before signing into your IDP. So now, say that I can add your boss's email to my IDP, and I try signing into your app. The most obvious thing that you might do is look up for an existing user account and then sign me in and give me access to all of the workspaces associated with that account. And this is identity linking. You're linking this SSO profile that you haven't seen before to this existing user account. And identity linking in this method is not safe because then I could get access to your corporate workspace in the app. It's really easy to get wrong. So how does Slack safely link SSO profiles, given that I could add your boss's email to my IDP? So the single workspace model is a key component. When you sign in via SSO in Slack, you're actually only ever signing into a single workspace. And so the limit of the access, or the access that you get is very limited. So if I try signing in as your boss, I only get access to the workspace that I created where I set up SSO. I don't get access to any existing of your boss's user accounts. I'm blocked. OK, so we looked at Slack. They use a single workspace model. Signing in via SSO only gives you access to that workspace. Let's take a look at Notion. So Notion's an interesting product. It's both like collaborative for teams, but then they also try to bring value for individuals. How many of you have like a personal Notion workspace? Yeah, like a fair number. And that's different than Slack. Like you're not creating a Slack account just for yourself for like notes or whatever, but you might for Notion. And this sort of like strategy of theirs ends up presenting itself in identity decisions that they made. So let's look back at our org models. I'm not going to make you raise your hands this time, but just think about it for a second. Which model do you think Notion uses? And they use the multiple workspaces model. So when you're switching between workspaces in Notion, you're using the same user. Change your name in one, it changes your name everywhere. It's the same user object. So if you remember Slack, the single workspace model was really critical in preventing me from being able to sign in as your boss. So how does Notion handle this? And the key with Notion is domain verification. This is pretty common in a lot of B2B apps that have like a centralized user account with org switching, but it's the same user. The IT admin has to verify their email domain first before setting up SSO. And then, even though signing in via SSO gives you access to that centralized user object and all workspaces that that user is a member of, only users with a verified email domain, verified by that IT admin, can sign in via that SSO connection. Everybody else is blocked. So I try to sign in as your boss. And I'm blocked because I've not verified your boss's email domain. Now, verified domains provide a second really important use in Notion, and that is user management. So when you have an app, an organization, and like anyone could be a member of it, you could like add a design contractor to your organization using their personal email address. Maybe they have a personal workspace too, or they do vacation planning with their partner or whatever. Notion needs a way of figuring out for the IT admin of that organization which users can the IT admin manage. We all know the IT admins, they want control. You know, they want to reset passwords or set session duration, log users out, even deactivate users. So how can an app like Notion differentiate between which users the IT admin can control and cannot? And the key is domain verification. Only users with a verified email domain are controlled by the admin. So these identity decisions all enable a key part of Notion's growth strategy. Users can organically sign up using their work emails, and they start taking notes for meetings or whatever because Notion's their preferred app of choice. And then an admin can create a corporate workspace and verify their domain and start actually managing these users. And Notion's built a bunch of tools for like transferring data from one workspace to another to try to make this sales motion more seamless. Okay, so we did Slack, Notion. Now let's take a look at GitHub. GitHub is a very different model where you can bring your personal account to work with you. I've had the same GitHub account for I don't know how many years. I created it when I was 22 with a weirdo username, and it followed me to Venmo and then Quip and now WorkOS. So this is already like really different compared to Notion and Slack, right? So let's dig into how they model users and orgs. Okay, one more time, think about this. Which model do you think GitHub uses? And it's actually a trick question. They built both models. Their original was this multiple workspaces model. So bringing my user account with me from job to job, centralized user object, maybe I'm in more than one org. And a few years ago, they released a new feature called Enterprise Managed Users. And that gives the IT admin way more control over each of the users. For the sake of this talk, we're going to talk about the multiple workspaces model for GitHub, the original. It's more interesting in terms of the SSO features. OK, so let's talk about how GitHub safely links SSO profiles. Now, their implementation is really interesting to me. And it's largely influenced by the product decision that the user owns the user account, not the IT admin. You bring it from job to job. You shouldn't, your job shouldn't be able to deactivate that account. You lose access to your own personal repos. That doesn't make sense. So in GitHub, when you sign in via SSO, they actually require another factor. They require you to enter in your personal credential, your password or passkey. And they do this even when you're signing in via IDP init SSO. So here I'm in my identity provider, got these tiles with apps that I have access to. I click on GitHub, and I'm prompted also to complete SSO, I've got to sign in with my password. So one more time, let's check out our threat model. I can try signing in as your boss. That's me, by the way. I don't know if you could tell the resemblance. Signing in as your boss. Here's your boss's centralized user account in GitHub. And I can't sign into that account because I don't have your boss's GitHub password, the personal credential. So GitHub treats SSO very differently than these other apps that we looked at. It's not really about the user's identity. Instead, it's controlling organization access. And on GitHub.com, even though I'm a member of an org that requires SSO, I can sign in using only my personal credentials. And this is the home screen that they show me with activity. It's all public repo activity or my personal repos. And then at the top here, we can see that to get to see activity from orgs that require SSO, I have to authenticate with them. So it gates organization access, basically. So why did GitHub do it this way? And I think it's because of their product-led growth strategy. They prioritized winning the open source market. This is largely free, public repos are free. Then every developer uses GitHub. And then finally, you start a company. GitHub's the de facto tool for what you would use for source control. And if GitHub had made different identity decisions along the way, it could have worked against this strategy. Instead, the decisions they made were influenced by this. OK, so we chatted about 3 apps. Let's talk about your app. We started with this chaos. There's also mopping authentication. That one I really like. And we distilled that to a few core decisions that your app needs to make in terms of identity. So like, which organization model do you use? How do you prevent me from signing in as your boss? And I wish that I could tell you, like, oh, I've done all this research, and like this answer is the right one for your app. But it turns out it's not one size fits all. And the reason is what's best for your app is all rooted in your go-to-market strategy, your product, your business strategy. Even if you're outsourcing off to a vendor like WorkOS, which hopefully you are or will, you still need to make sure that you're integrating in a way that supports your business strategy. So my advice is to talk to your go-to-market team. Here's some questions that you could ask them to get started. And before this talk, you might have been thinking that SSO is like hiring some guy in a hoodie that's like sitting in a corner. Oh, it's always the guy, right? Sitting in a corner like with a hoodie on and typing on his laptop, like working on a bug, and don't talk to me, like I'm doing some SAML stuff. Don't talk to me. But what I'd like to leave you with is in a product-led growth world where we're finding apps that we enjoy, like Slack and Notion and GitHub, and we're bringing those to work with us. Identity is more than just SAML stuff. You're having to make these higher-level decisions, product-level decisions about your app, and making sure that those decisions that you make works with your strategy and not against it. And then with that, you can help facilitate your company's growth. And with that, I'd like to just say thank you for going on this journey with me. I actually really enjoy talking about this stuff, so come talk to me, ask me questions. We can chat about your app or whatever. Try to see if I can sign into your app as your boss. That could be fun, too. And yeah, we've got a few minutes for questions.
I was wondering how often you run into companies where they do need to support more than one domain name.
You know what?
Like vendors
sometimes, yeah, we did. Garrett and I looked this up recently, and there's one organization or like a handful of orgs that have 300 domains. Do you want to guess what's going on? Anyone want to guess? Schools? Schools. Who guessed schools? That you deserve, I don't know, something. I have nothing to give, but yeah, swag. Yeah, the schools have like a bunch of different, like universities, a bunch of different subdomains, like one for each department. There's like math.utexas.edu and CS and whatever. Yeah.
So you covered how to think about the identity model for your app in the context of like auth providers. Mm-hmm. But are there considerations if you're using like user provisioning, like from directory providers in terms of your identity model?
A couple of the apps that we looked at have different ways of handling this. So like for Slack, for example, it's more like traditional SCIM setup where the admin can provision and deprovision users because they're only a member of that workspace that the admin controls. But with GitHub, especially with their like normal, I don't even know what they call it. They have like a 5-word name for the like OG GitHub.com multiple workspace model. The admin doesn't control or own those user accounts. They can't deprovision it. Like Mark, our IT admin, can't deprovision my GitHub account that I've used since I was 22. So instead, for that model for GitHub, you can set up SCIM, basically. I think they call it like team sync, and instead the user's just like removed from the org. They lose access to the org rather than being like deprovisioned entirely.
Is it common at all for the same domain to be used across multiple workspaces, and how is that usually handled if it is?
Yeah, we see it sometimes for like acquisitions or like multiple branches of the same company, but they have like 2 different IT admins and different systems. It largely like depends on the setup. But one consideration that's kind of tricky is, we didn't touch on this on the talk at all, but home realm discovery, like when a user enters their email address in the app, which identity provider do you route them to? And if the user's already logged in before, it's not the first time, and they have like a membership of one of the orgs, you could do it based on membership. But If they haven't, then maybe you rely on Skim for pre-provisioning. That's another way. Or, yeah, it gets harder. If your orgs aren't like super secret, you could do like, so in Slack, while the user object is different in multiple orgs, you can, if you go to like slack.com in the web, you can go through an email verification flow, and it'll show you all the orgs associated with that email. So you could do a similar thing if like the user hasn't already been provisioned into one of the orgs, and then allow them to select which one. Well, thank you, everybody.
Let's go.